A woman with a baby shows up at a stranger's door in the dead of winter, turned away by everyone else. What happened next would change all their lives in a way no one could have predicted. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. It was a bitter December evening in a small town on the outskirts of Boston. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying snowflakes that danced in the dim glow of streetlights. Jack Miller, a 38-year-old carpenter who had spent the last decade living alone after his wife's passing, was settling in for another quiet night when an unexpected knock disrupted the silence of his modest home. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. There, illuminated by his porch light, stood a young woman barely in her 20s, clutching a bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket. Her face was pale, eyes red from crying, and her thin jacket offered little protection against the winter chill. "Please," she called out, her voice trembling, "just one night. I've been turned away everywhere else." Jack hesitated, his hand resting on the doorknob. The town had been experiencing an increase in crime lately, and caution had become second nature to most residents. But something in the woman's desperate expression made him unlock the door. "Come in before you freeze out there," he said, stepping aside. The young woman hurried in, and as the light hit the bundle in her arms, Jack realized it was a baby, no more than a few months old, sleeping peacefully despite the cold. "I'm Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And this is Emma. I didn't know where else to go." Jack's living room was modest but warm, with a fireplace casting a gentle glow across worn furniture. "Sit down," he offered, gesturing toward the couch. "I'll make you some tea." From the kitchen, Jack watched as Sarah gently rocked the baby, her exhaustion evident in every movement. When he returned with 2 steaming mugs, she accepted hers gratefully. "I'm not usually in the habit of letting strangers into my home," Jack said, settling into his armchair. "But it's not a night to be out there with a baby." Sarah nodded, her eyes downcast. "Everyone else thought the same about letting strangers in. 3 houses before yours. All of them took one look at me and ... Her voice trailed off. "What brought you here?" "To this town, I mean," Jack asked, trying to keep his tone conversational despite his growing concern. Sarah seemed to weigh her words carefully. "Emma's father. He wasn't a good man. When I told him I was pregnant, he changed, became controlling, then violent." She absently touched a fading bruise on her wrist. "I left Chicago 2 weeks ago, just taking what I could carry. I've been moving east, staying in shelters when I could find them." Jack nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. His late wife had volunteered at a women's shelter, and he'd heard similar stories before. "I thought my cousin lived in this town," Sarah continued. "But when I finally got here, I found out she moved to California last year. I spent what little money I have left on a motel last night, but today ... She shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "I just need somewhere to stay tonight. Tomorrow I'll figure something out." The baby stirred, making tiny noises that echoed in the quiet room. Sarah immediately turned her attention to Emma, checking the blanket and rocking her gently. "You can stay here tonight," Jack said finally. "I have a spare bedroom upstairs. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "Thank you. I promise we'll be gone tomorrow. I don't want to impose." Jack stood up, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's just one night. Anyone would do the same." "No," Sarah said quietly. "They wouldn't. You're the first person who opened their door to us." Later, after showing Sarah to the spare room and providing her with clean towels and an old t-shirt of his to sleep in, Jack sat alone in his living room, wondering about the decision he'd just made. His neighbor Tom would call him foolish for letting strangers into his home. The local news was full of stories about scams and home invasions. But as he stared into the dying embers of the fire, Jack couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. The photograph on his mantel caught his eye, himself and Maria on their wedding day, her smile radiant and full of promise for a future they would never fully realize. She would have opened the door without hesitation. Some risks were worth taking, she always said. As Jack finally headed to bed, he paused outside the guest room, hearing the soft lullaby Sarah was singing to Emma. The simple melody transported him back to dreams he and Maria once shared, dreams of a family, of children they never had time to have before cancer took her away. He moved quietly to his own room, thinking about tomorrow and what it might bring. One night, he had promised. Just one night to help a young mother and her child get back on their feet. As he drifted off to sleep, Jack couldn't have known how that single decision would change the course of all their lives. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Jack awoke to unfamiliar sounds in his kitchen. For a moment, he was disoriented, then the events of the previous night came rushing back. He quickly dressed and made his way downstairs to find Sarah, attempting to prepare breakfast with one arm while balancing Emma in the other. "You didn't have to do that," Jack said, startling her slightly. Sarah turned, looking embarrassed. "It's the least I could do after your kindness. I hope you don't mind that I use some eggs and bread." "Not at all." Jack moved to the coffee maker and started brewing a pot. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in weeks," Sarah admitted. Emma actually slept through the night for once. As they ate breakfast, Jack noticed how Sarah's eyes kept darting to the window, as if expecting trouble to arrive at any moment. The baby sat in her lap, occasionally grabbing at the edge of the table with tiny fingers. "So what's your plan for today?" Jack asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah's fork paused midway to her mouth. I'm not sure. Find the local shelter. I guess, try to get a job somewhere." Her voice lacked conviction. Jack considered her words. He'd lived in Millfield long enough to know the closest women's shelter was 30 miles away, and it was usually at capacity. The local economy wasn't great either. The furniture factory had closed last year, leaving many without work. "It's Sunday," Jack said finally. "Shelters will be doing intake tomorrow, not today. And you won't find anyone hiring until Monday." At the earliest, Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly. "I understand. I'll gather our things and be out of your way. Maybe there's a church that could help." "That's not what I meant," Jack interrupted. "I was thinking you could stay another night. Until you can make proper arrangements tomorrow." The relief on Sarah's face was immediate, though she tried to hide it. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "I'm sure." Jack stood and carried his plate to the sink. "Besides, there's a snowstorm coming this afternoon. Not a good day to be out searching." As if on cue, Emma began to fuss, tiny hands waving in the air. Sarah immediately turned her attention to the baby, speaking in soft, soothing tones. Jack watched the interaction, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. It had been so long since his house had contained anything but silence. Later that morning, while Sarah gave Emma a bath in the kitchen sink, Jack made a few discreet phone calls. His friend Mike worked at the town's hardware store, which was looking for part-time help. The apartment above Mrs. Henderson's garage had been empty since her grandson moved out last summer. Small arrangements, small possibilities, but it was a start. When he returned to the kitchen, Sarah was dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, clearly worn and in need of washing. "I have some laundry to do," Jack offered. "If you want to add yours to the load." Sarah hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I don't have anything else to wear." "I might have a solution for that," Jack replied. He disappeared upstairs and returned with a cardboard box. "These were my wife's. They've been in the closet for years. She was about your size, I think." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "Your wife?" "Maria," Jack said, his voice softening. "She passed away 8 years ago, cancer." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "I shouldn't take her things." She would have wanted them used, Jack said firmly. Maria hated waste. She would have been the first to offer them to you. As the day progressed, the predicted snowstorm arrived, blanketing the town in white. Jack found himself sharing more about his life than he had with anyone in years. How he and Maria had moved to Millfield with dreams of renovating the old house and filling it with children. How her diagnosis had changed everything, how quiet the place had felt since her passing. In turn, Sarah slowly revealed more of her own story, growing up in a small town outside Chicago, meeting Emma's father in her first semester of community college, dropping out when she became pregnant, and the gradual escalation of his controlling behavior until she feared for both her and Emma's safety. He found us twice when I tried to leave, she confessed as they sat in the living room, watching the snow fall outside. That's why I came so far east. I don't know anyone here, but neither does he. Emma, now dressed in a clean onesie Jack had bought in town that morning, something he didn't mention to Sarah, was on a blanket on the floor, fascinated by a wooden rattle he had carved years ago for a friend's child. She likes you, Sarah observed as Emma reached toward Jack, babbling happily. Jack smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on his face. She's easy to like back. As evening approached, Jack prepared a simple dinner while Sarah put Emma down for a nap. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on him. How quickly his solitary routine had adapted to include these two strangers. It should have felt intrusive, but somehow it didn't. Over dinner, Jack cleared his throat nervously. I made some calls today. Mike at the hardware store mentioned they need someone for weekday mornings. And Mrs. Henderson has a small apartment over her garage, nothing fancy, but she's a good landlord. Sarah stared at him, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. You ... You did that for us? Just passing along information, Jack said, suddenly embarrassed. This town isn't so bad once you get to know it. People look out for each other. Why are you helping us? Sarah asked directly, her eyes searching his face. You don't know me. I could be anyone. Jack considered the question seriously. I guess. Because someone once helped me when I needed it. After Maria died, I wasn't in a good place. My neighbor Tom, he just showed up every day, made sure I ate, talked to me even when I didn't answer. Sometimes that's all it takes, one person who doesn't walk away. Later that night, as snow continued to fall outside, creating a peaceful cocoon around the house, Jack sat in his workshop behind the kitchen, carefully sanding a small wooden horse. He hadn't made a toy in years, but his hands remembered the motions. Across the hall, he could hear Sarah's soft voice reading a story to Emma, probably from one of the children's books he'd kept boxed up in the spare room. One more day, he told himself. Tomorrow she would make her own decisions. But as he worked, the wood beneath his fingers, Jack allowed himself to wonder if perhaps his quiet house had been waiting all this time, not just for someone to fill its rooms, but for him to remember what it meant to be needed. Monday morning arrived with crisp sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow. Jack woke early, his mind already running through the day ahead. He had promised to introduce Sarah to Mike at the hardware store at 10, and Mrs. Henderson had agreed to show the apartment at noon. It felt strange to have his day structured around someone else's needs after so many years of solitary routine. Downstairs, he found Sarah already awake, feeding Emma in the kitchen. She had dressed in a pair of Maria's jeans and a simple blue sweater that brought out the color in her eyes. The sight caused Jack to pause in the doorway. For a fleeting moment, the kitchen seemed to come alive again, filled with possibility rather than memories. Good morning, Sarah said, noticing him. I hope it's okay that I made coffee. Of course, Jack replied, pouring himself a cup. You look ... The clothes fit well. Sarah glanced down self-consciously. They do, thank you again. I'll pay you back for everything once I get on my feet. Jack waved away her words. No need, they were just sitting in boxes. As they prepared for the day, Jack found himself becoming increasingly aware of what would happen if Sarah got the job, if she liked the apartment, if she decided to stay in Millfield. His quiet life would return to normal. The thought didn't bring the relief he might have expected. The hardware store sat on Main Street, its large front windows displaying seasonal items and tools. As they entered, the bell above the door announced their arrival, and Mike looked up from behind the counter. "Jack! Good to see you out and about," he called, his eyes curiously taking in Sarah and the baby carrier she held. "Mike, this is Sarah, the one I mentioned on the phone," Jack said, suddenly feeling awkward in his role as intermediary. Mike's friendly face broke into a smile. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. And who's this little one?" "This is Emma," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a nervousness that made Jack instinctively step closer to her side. The interview, such as it was, took place in the small office at the back of the store. Jack waited with Emma by the paint samples, feeling strangely protective as he watched the baby examine a color wheel with intense concentration. "She likes blue," a voice observed, and Jack turned to find Tom, his next-door neighbor, studying them with undisguised curiosity. "Seems that way," Jack agreed, adjusting the carrier more comfortably in his arms. "Word travels fast in small towns," Tom said, moving closer. "Heard you had some house guests." "Didn't know one was quite so small," Jack sighed. "It's temporary. Just helping out until they get settled." Tom raised an eyebrow. "That so? Because this is the first time I've seen you in town in months, and suddenly you're playing tour guide." He paused, then added more gently, "It's good, Jack. You've been alone too long." Before Jack could respond, Sarah emerged from the office, her face bright with relief. "I got the job. 20 hours a week to start weekday mornings." Mike followed, grinning. "She starts tomorrow. Customer service skills are more important than knowing hardware. I can teach the rest." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. They stopped at the diner for an early lunch, where several townspeople Jack had known for years suddenly found reasons to approach their table, introducing themselves to Sarah with thinly veiled curiosity. Each time, Jack noticed how Sarah tensed slightly before forcing a smile, how her eyes would dart to the door as if mapping escape routes. "Small towns," Jack explained as they walked toward Mrs. Henderson's house. "Everyone knows everyone's business. Is that why they're all staring?" "Because I'm with you?" Sarah asked. Jack considered this. "Partly. I haven't exactly been social these past few years. But mostly it's because you're new, and they're curious. And not suspicious." Sarah's voice had an edge to it. "Should they be?" Jack asked quietly. Sarah stopped walking, adjusting Emma's carrier to her other arm. "No, but in my experience, people don't usually help strangers without wanting something in return." Jack met her gaze steadily. "I'm not people, Sarah. I'm just someone who's been where you are, lost and needing a break." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Sarah nodded slowly. "I believe you. It's just hard to trust after everything." Mrs. Henderson's house was a well-maintained Victorian on Maple Street, with the garage apartment accessed by an external staircase at the back. The elderly woman greeted them warmly, immediately cooing over Emma while leading them up to see the space. The apartment was small but clean, one bedroom, a tiny living area with a kitchenette, and a bathroom with a shower stall. The furnishings were sparse but functional, and large windows filled the space with natural light. "It's not much," Mrs. Henderson acknowledged, "but the heat works well, and I don't charge extra for utilities, $500 a month." Sarah walked through the rooms, bouncing Emma gently as she considered the space. Jack could see her mentally calculating, trying to determine if her new part-time job would cover rent and necessities. "It's perfect," she finally said, though her voice betrayed her concern about the cost. Mrs. Henderson seemed to sense this. "Tell you what, first month half price, since you'll be helping me with some yard work come spring." That'll give you time to get settled." The relief on Sarah's face was immediate. "Thank you, that's very generous." As they walked back toward Jack's house, a light snow began to fall again. Emma was asleep in her carrier, bundled against the cold, and Sarah walked quietly beside Jack, lost in thought. "It's really happening," she finally said. "A job, an apartment. I never thought we'd get this far." "You did it," Jack corrected her. "I just made a few phone calls." Sarah shook her head. "You gave us a chance when no one else would. That means everything." Back at the house, as evening settled in, they sat in the living room making plans for Sarah's move to the apartment at the end of the week. Jack had offered to help her get some essential items: a crib for Emma, basic kitchen supplies, towels, and bedding. "I can't take any more from you," Sarah protested. "Consider it a loan then," Jack suggested, "until you're on your feet." As the evening progressed, Jack found himself growing increasingly aware that their temporary arrangement was coming to an end. 3 days ago, he had been alone in his quiet house, and soon he would be again. The thought left him feeling hollow. In a way he hadn't expected. Emma, now awake and alert on her blanket on the floor, suddenly rolled from her back to her stomach for the first time, looking as surprised by the achievement as the adults in the room. "Did you see that?" Sarah exclaimed, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. "Emma, you rolled over." Jack found himself kneeling beside them, sharing in the celebration of this small milestone. Emma looked up at both of them, her face breaking into a gummy smile that seemed to illuminate the room. In that moment, watching Sarah's face filled with motherly pride, Jack realized something had shifted inside him. The house that had felt like a memorial to his past now hummed with possibility. The future, which had for so long seemed like an empty road stretching before him, now held questions he hadn't allowed himself to consider. Later, after Sarah had taken Emma upstairs to bed, Jack stood in his workshop, running his hands over the half-finished rocking horse he had started years ago, when he and Maria had still been planning for children of their own. He had abandoned it after her diagnosis, unable to face the dreams it represented. Now his fingers traced the smooth wood, and he found himself reaching for his tools, ready to continue what he had once begun. Friday afternoon came with a flurry of activity as Jack loaded the last of Sarah and Emma's belongings into his truck. The past week had transformed his once quiet house into a staging area for their new beginning. Donated furniture from neighbors who had heard their story, kitchen supplies unearthed from Jack's own cabinets, and a beautiful wooden crib that Tom had surprised them with, explaining gruffly that it had been in his attic since his grown children had used it. "I think that's everything," Sarah said, standing in Jack's living room with Emma in her arms. The baby had grown increasingly attached to Jack over the past 5 days, reaching for him whenever he entered the room, a development that both warmed and worried him. "Almost everything," Jack replied, disappearing into his workshop. He returned carrying the rocking horse, now finished and polished to a soft glow. "For when she's a little older." Sarah's eyes widened. "Jack, it's beautiful, but I can't—" "You can," he interrupted gently. "I started it years ago, but it was never meant to sit in my workshop gathering dust." The drive to the apartment was quiet, both of them aware of the transition taking place. As they carried boxes up the narrow stairs to Sarah's new home, Jack found himself noticing details he'd missed during their first visit. How the afternoon sun created patterns on the wood floor, the way the kitchenette window overlooked Mrs. Henderson's garden, the small alcove perfect for Emma's crib. "It's cozy," he observed, setting down the last box in the living room. Sarah nodded, bouncing Emma on her hip. "It's ours," she said simply, and Jack understood what those 2 words meant to someone who had been running for so long. As the afternoon stretched into evening, they worked together to arrange the small space. Jack hung curtains while Sarah unpacked kitchen items, their movements falling into an easy rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. When Mrs. Henderson appeared with a casserole for their first dinner, just being neighborly, she insisted, it struck Jack how quickly Sarah and Emma had become integrated into the community. "Will you stay and eat with us?" Sarah asked when the apartment was finally arranged to her satisfaction. Jack hesitated. This was the moment he had been dreading, the formal end to their temporary arrangement. "I should probably get going. Let you two settle in." "Please," Sarah said quietly. "It wouldn't feel right, our first meal here without you." They ate at the small table by the window, Emma dozing in the portable bassinet beside them. The conversation flowed easily, touching on Sarah's first few days at the hardware store, Mrs. Henderson's overly friendly cat that had already tried to adopt them, and Jack's upcoming carpentry project for the elementary school. "You know," Sarah said as they cleared the dishes, "Emma has her 2-month checkup on Tuesday. I was wondering if you'd be willing to come with us. The doctor's office is across town, and I'm still learning the bus routes." Jack recognized the request for what it was, not just practical assistance, but an invitation to remain in their lives. "I'd be happy to," he replied, surprised by how much he meant it. As the evening wound down and the time for departure could no longer be postponed, Jack found himself standing awkwardly by the door. "If you need anything, I know who to call," Sarah finished for him, Emma sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." Impulsively, he reached out and squeezed her free hand. "I'll see you Tuesday then." The drive home felt longer than it should have, his truck unusually empty and quiet. When Jack finally pulled into his driveway, the dark windows of his house seemed to watch him accusingly. Inside, the silence was immediate and oppressive. He walked through the rooms, noticing the small traces of Sarah and Emma that remained. A forgotten baby sock under the couch, the lingering scent of the lotion Sarah used for Emma's sensitive skin. The empty space where the portable bassinet had stood. Jack made himself a cup of coffee and sat at his kitchen table, feeling the weight of solitude settling back onto his shoulders. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet house, marking the return to normalcy he had thought he wanted. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Tom, inviting him over for Saturday breakfast, something they hadn't done in months. "Figured you might want some company," his friend said, not quite managing to sound casual. First day back to bachelor life and all. Jack found himself smiling at Tom's transparent concern. "Thanks, I'd like that." After hanging up, Jack wandered into his workshop, running his hands over the tools and wood scraps left from finishing the rocking horse. An idea began to form, a mobile for above Emma's crib, stars and moons suspended in perfect balance. He could start it tonight, have it ready by Tuesday. The realization hit him suddenly. He was already planning to see them again, already finding reasons to remain connected. The thought should have alarmed him. This wasn't what he had intended when he opened his door that snowy night, but instead, it filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Sunday morning, Jack woke to the sound of his doorbell. Confused, he made his way downstairs to find Sarah standing on his porch, Emma bundled against the December chill. "Is everything okay?" he asked immediately, concern sharpening his voice. Sarah nodded, shifting Emma to her other arm. "Everything's fine. We thought you might want to join us for a walk. There's a park near the apartment, and it's such a clear day." Relief washed over Jack, followed by a warmth that spread through his chest. "I'd like that. Come in while I get my coat." As he grabbed his jacket, Jack caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at him seemed different somehow, more present, more engaged with the world. It was a subtle change, but undeniable. At the park, they walked slowly along the paths, Jack pushing Emma's stroller while Sarah pointed out cardinals flitting between snow-laden branches. The winter sun cast long shadows across the ground, and their breath formed clouds in the crisp air. "I was thinking," Sarah said after a comfortable silence. "That maybe you could come for dinner one night this week. Nothing fancy, just you." "No, to say thank you." Jack looked at her, really looked at her. The determined set of her chin, the careful way she phrased the invitation, the hope in her eyes that she was trying to keep casual. In that moment, he understood that she was offering him something as precious as what he had given her, a connection, a place in their lives, a chance to belong somewhere again. "I'd like that," he said simply. "And maybe you two could come over on Sunday afternoon sometimes. The house is too quiet." Sarah's smile was like the winter sun breaking through clouds. "We'd like that too." As they continued their walk, Emma babbling happily in her stroller, Jack felt something settle in his heart, not an ending to his grief for Maria, but a beginning of something new that could exist alongside it. The future, which had for so long seemed like a burden to be endured, now stretched before him filled with possibilities. Sunday walks in the park, Tuesday doctor appointments, dinner at a small table by a window overlooking the garden. Later, as they stood outside Sarah's apartment saying goodbye, Emma reached out from her mother's arms toward Jack, her tiny face determined. Without hesitation, Jack took her, cradling her against his chest as naturally as if he had been doing it all his life. "She knows," Sarah said softly. "She knows you're not just anyone to us." Jack looked down at Emma, then at Sarah, and found himself at a crossroads he hadn't expected to reach. The path forward wasn't clear, wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time in years he wanted to discover where it might lead. "I'll see you Tuesday," he promised, gently returning Emma to Sarah's arms. But this time, the words felt different, not a polite arrangement between temporary acquaintances, but a commitment to continue what had begun that snowy night when he chose to open his door to a stranger. As Jack drove home, the winter sun setting behind him, he found himself smiling. His house would be quiet tonight, but it no longer felt empty. It was simply waiting, like he was, for what tomorrow might bring.